The lights of the studio glimmered softly as the cameras rolled, and the microphones captured every breath, every tremor in his voice. When Mel Gibson leaned forward during his conversation on the Joe Rogan Experience, there was something in his eyes, something deeper than opinion. It was conviction. His words didn't merely echo. They carved silence into the air, silencing even the usually sharp-tongued host. He spoke not as a celebrity, not as a filmmaker, but as a man who had seen too much to remain silent. "There are signs burned into that cloth," he said. "Wounds from scourging, piercings on the hands and feet, the blood, the pollen from plants that don't grow anywhere else but in ancient Palestine. And the image shouldn't even exist." It was more than a claim. It was a call. Gibson wasn't just referencing a religious artifact. He was unveiling what might be one of the most perplexing, divine, and historically disruptive objects known to humanity, the Shroud of Turin. He described it with reverence, but also with certainty, recalling how scientists from prestigious backgrounds, even those once skeptical, had walked away from the evidence transformed. One detail stood out: the coins. He leaned in and whispered with a chill in his voice. "If you look closely over the eyes of the man in the shroud, you can make out faint markings of coins from the era of Tiberius Caesar. Coins, placed there in the Jewish tradition of the 1st century during burial. Not decorative, not symbolic, but real coins, dated to the exact time Pontius Pilate governed Judea. And if this is true, if these ancient coins were laid on the eyes of the crucified, then everything changes. Because to forge such a thing in the 14th century without modern technology would have been impossible. Mel Gibson didn't present a theory. He pointed to hard, physical evidence. Pollen traces from extinct species native to Jerusalem, fabric weaving patterns used only in the 1st century, and the unmistakable image of man who bore the very same wounds the Gospels describe. He wasn't just speaking to Christians. He was speaking to anyone who had ever questioned the lines between myth and reality. His tone wasn't aggressive. It was humble, almost tender, as if he knew the weight of what he carried. And so we must ask ourselves, what if the shroud isn't just symbolic? What if the image burned into the cloth is more than coincidence, more than artistry, more than medieval piety? What if it's him? Many have tried to disprove it, some with science, some with skepticism. Yet each time, the mystery deepens. The very tests used to dismiss the shroud have been reevaluated and found flawed. Contamination, exposure to fire, repairs, they all distorted the data. But the deeper scientists look, the more impossible it seems to explain away. That image, that face, remains. And friend, if you've ever doubted, or if your heart is still unsure, I invite you to open your mind just a little bit more. Because what Mel Gibson shared on that day was not just belief. It was an invitation to look again, to wonder, to believe. Speech balloon, before we go on, we have something special for you. If you want your name and city featured in our next video, along with a personal blessing message, just leave a comment below saying your name and where you're from. Imagine that thousands of people hearing your name in the next episode, a moment of light just for you. It's your chance to feel seen, remembered, and connected. So hit like, leave your name and city, and maybe your moment of light is next. Because what Mel said next, well, let's just say it left even the scientists breathless. In the next chapter, we'll explore discoveries so precise, so undeniable, that even non-believers were forced to rethink everything they thought they knew about death and about life. The shroud isn't loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It rests in silence. Soft linen folded across centuries, yet hold the power to unravel beliefs, bend history, and awaken souls. In a world obsessed with facts, with tangible data and technological proof, how do you explain an image that has no pigment, no brush strokes, no ink? An image that appears only when photographed in negative, revealing the face of a man who suffered like the Gospels describe, down to the smallest wound? Scientists in the late 19th century were the first to be confronted with this enigma. In 1898, Secondo Pia, an amateur photographer, captured the first photograph of the shroud. As he developed the plate, his hands trembled. He had expected a vague outline, a blurred cloth, but instead, what emerged was a clear, hauntingly beautiful face. like a divine portrait waiting in silence to be discovered. A face with closed eyes, blood stains, bruises, scourge marks, a crown of thorns. Everything was there. Modern science dove in head first. Microscopes, spectroscopy, 3D imaging, infrared analysis. But instead of resolving the mystery, it only deepened. They found blood, real human blood, type AB, the same blood type discovered in Eucharistic miracles like the one in Lanciano, where the consecrated host turned into literal flesh. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidences don't explain the pollen grains found embedded in the fabric. Grains from plants native to the Jerusalem region, many of them extinct today. They don't explain the weaving pattern unique to first-century Jewish burial cloths. They don't explain how the fabric survived not one, but multiple fires, the boiling oil, the attempts to erase it, and yet the image remained. Historians scratched their heads. Archaeologists leaned in closer. But Mel Gibson didn't need convincing. He had read the reports. He had spoken to experts behind closed doors. People connected to the STIRP project, the Shroud of Turin research project, made up of top scientists, including those from NASA and Los Alamos. People who had everything to lose by believing a miracle, but who did anyway because the evidence wouldn't allow them not to. And then there are the coins over the eyes, Tiberian leptons, minted between AD 29 and AD 32. Why does that matter? Because Jesus was crucified around the year 30 AD, and the custom of placing coins on the eyes of the deceased was a regional Jewish burial practice, one that no medieval forger would have even known about, let alone recreated with microscopic accuracy, visible only through modern imaging. The very dust particles on the cloth whispered of a time long past. And suddenly, it wasn't just a relic. It was a map, a silent witness, a mirror held up to history, reflecting a moment no artist could fake and no fire could erase. And through all this, Gibson repeated one simple truth. This isn't about belief anymore. It's about evidence. And for those willing to listen, to truly see, that changes everything. Speech Balloon, continue with us, because what comes next will touch your spirit in ways you didn't expect. The next chapter reveals the explosive phenomenon that etched the image onto the linen, an event so impossible by human standards that even the most hardened skeptics had no words left. Are you ready to see what light left this mark? There are moments in history when something breaks through, something beyond explanation, beyond the reach of even the sharpest scientific minds. The Shroud of Turin is one of those moments, and what lies at the heart of its mystery is not just the man it portrays, but the light. Yes, light. Not paint, not pressure, not natural decay, but a burst of radiant energy that scorched the fibers of the linen without burning them, creating an image so precise, so shallow, that it only penetrated 2 microns into thread. That's 1/50th the width of a human hair. Who or what could do that? This is where the story turns from remarkable to transcendent. Gibson recounted how researchers, particularly those in the nuclear field, began asking the question no one wanted to ask. Was this image caused by a radiation event? They weren't speaking metaphorically. They meant it literally. One physicist, stunned by the nature of the image, confessed that only a sudden and intense blast of light or energy could have created it, a kind of flash that emitted from within the body, not from external source. Imagine that for a moment. Not ink pressed against fabric, but light, issuing from the very body it enveloped, leaving a photonegative trace of the man it once covered. A light that originated from within a corpse at the moment it ceased to be a corpse. You may be asking yourself, how can we know this? The shroud behaves like a 3D scanner. Scientists discovered that the image encodes depth information. The darker areas of the image are where the cloth was closer to body. The lighter ones show greater distance. That means the image wasn't made by contact, but by something radiating outward, mapping the cloth like a topographic relief. There's no known process in all of science that can replicate this. Gibson reflected deeply on this phenomenon during the podcast, his voice lower, slower, as if the words were too heavy to carry. How do you forge a burst of light? He asked. And no one could answer, because it wasn't a question, it was a revelation. This wasn't just the image of a man crucified. It was a trace of a moment, the recording of something more profound, the instant when death reversed, when decay turned to resurrection, when darkness exploded into divine brilliance. The body didn't leave a stain. It left a signature, one so precise, so untampered, that it still defies every forensic model we have. And it's not just theory. In 2011, Italian scientists tried to replicate the image using ultraviolet laser pulses. Their conclusion? The intensity needed to create the shroud's image would require a flash of light 34 billion watts strong. Let that sink in. The energy burst would need to be so powerful, it could vaporize anything else nearby. Yet the cloth wasn't destroyed. The image is gentle, intact, beautiful, like a kiss of light from another world. And now I ask you to stay with us, because in the next chapter, we'll look at the blood, the real blood that stained the cloth, and the reason why even non-believing scientists began to whisper the word they had once mocked: resurrection. Can science really explain what was left behind? There's something sacred about blood. It carries memory. It carries pain. It carries life itself. And on the Shroud of Turin, blood is not a metaphor. It is literal, human, and it speaks. Mel Gibson didn't hesitate. When he brought this up, he spoke not with the zeal of a preacher, but with the solemnity of someone who had seen too much, studied too deeply, and could no longer pretend it was just a coincidence. There's blood on the cloth, he said softly, but not just any blood. It's type AB, the rarest among us, and the same type found in Eucharistic miracles across the world, that stopped the room cold, because AB is not only rare, it is universal in plasma. It receives all. What a mystery. What a sign. The shroud isn't only marked by wounds. It's drenched in suffering. The bloodstains follow the shape of scourging, of punctures, of pierced feet and hands. One wide stain over the side of the torso, as if someone had driven a spear into the body just after death. It aligns perfectly with the Gospel of John. One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. John 19, verse 34. Scientists didn't expect to find anything. After all, how could blood survive centuries? But it was there, tested, confirmed, real, and even more stunning, the serum halos, the separation of red blood cells in plasma visible only under ultraviolet light, still present after 2,000 years, something that no medieval forger could even begin to imagine, much less replicate. The blood was alive. It had flowed from a living, tortured body. The patterns, the direction, the clotting, all matched what would be expected of someone crucified, someone crowned with thorns, beaten and pierced. And yet, through it all, something gentle remained, something almost tender in the way the blood clung to the fabric. This wasn't chaos. It was deliberate, as if even the suffering was sacred. One forensic expert said it best: what we see here isn't the result of violence alone. It's the result of love willing to endure it. Let that settle in your heart for a moment, because the shroud doesn't show a man defeated. It shows a man offering. And in every drop of blood, in every mark upon that cloth, the message is the same. I see your pain. I carried it too. I overcame it for you. Speech balloon if these words touch something inside you. If your heart whispered yes, then let your spirit respond. Take a moment and write men in the comments below. Not for us, not for the algorithm, but as a quiet agreement between your soul and the truth you just heard. A word of peace, a word of faith, a word that says, I believe. In the next chapter, we'll travel beyond the fabric, into the testimonies of scientists who did not believe until they came face to face with something they could no longer deny. Can a man lose his doubt by looking at a piece of cloth? You're about to find out. It's easy to dismiss believers. They're moved by emotion, guided by faith, often accused of seeing miracles where none exist. But what happens when those who do not believe, those trained to measure, to doubt, to dissect, begin to tremble before something they cannot explain? This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Not in the chapels, not in the churches, but in the labs. Mel Gibson spoke carefully about it, not to sensationalize, but to reveal. He referenced the men and women of the STIRP team, an elite group of scientists assembled not by the church, but by curiosity. a team that included experts from NASA, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and universities around the world. Their mission was clear: examine the shroud with every available technology and determine once and for all whether it was real or a medieval fraud. They were physicists, chemists, biologists, engineers. Some were atheists, others were skeptics. None of them were prepared for what they would find. What began as analysis soon became confrontation, a confrontation with the impossible. One scientist, deeply agnostic, reportedly left the project and never spoke publicly again about it. Another, the nuclear imaging specialist Dr. John Jackson, admitted the image was not the product of an artist. It was not formed by contact. It was not formed by vapor. It was not formed by heat or any known method. The best explanation is something we do not yet understand. Others echoed this. Words like unexplainable, non-reproducible, and beyond current science filled the final reports. But perhaps the most striking testimony came from a high-level researcher in nuclear technology, Dr. de Maralla, who said plainly, a real physical resurrection is the best and only explanation. Let that settle. Not poetic resurrection, not symbolic. Physical. Something happened to that body. Something outside the realm of biology. Something that forced even the most rational minds to pause, lower their eyes, and whisper the one word they never thought they'd say: miracle. And that's where Mel Gibson's voice caught during the interview. He had seen the reports. He had talked to some of the experts. And what shook him wasn't just what they discovered. It was what they couldn't explain. These were not men prone to fantasy. They dealt with lasers and radiation, with carbon dating and forensic microscopy. And yet, one by one, they began to walk away humbled or changed. Because at some point, when every tool fails, when every theory collapses, what remains is a stillness, a sacred silence that only the soul can interpret. In the next chapter, we return to the shroud itself, not as scientists or historians, but as humans, witnesses to pain so intimate, so detailed, that it can only be called holy. Are you ready to see the face of suffering and the love that endures it? There's a moment in every journey where silence becomes unbearable. You've seen the data, heard the experts, felt the weight of evidence. But now it's time to look, not with the mind, but with the heart. Look at the face on the shroud. It's not a painting, not a sculpture. It's not crafted by human hands. It's a face etched by pain and preserved by something none of us fully understand. A man, eyes closed, his brow swollen, blood clinging to his hair. The cartilage of his nose appears broken, strips of beard ripped out, a cheekbone bruised, the marks of a Roman flagrum, an instrument of torture with metal and bone tips, slashed across his shoulders and back. These are not symbols. These are wounds, and they are real. Every mark has been analyzed. The direction of the lashes, the swelling of the lips, the abrasions across the knees and the dirt embedded in the linen. Dirt from the streets of Jerusalem, consistent with ancient road dust. This man fell. More than once. He carried something heavy, so heavy that it crushed his body with every step. And when he fell, the weight landed on him, on his chest, on his face. And still, he rose again. Researchers noticed something else. A wound in the wrist, not the palm, as commonly depicted in medieval art. Because crucifixion through the palm wouldn't support the weight of the body, but a nail through the wrist, specifically the space of destot, would, and such a nail would press against a median nerve, causing agonizing pain and forcing the thumb to retract inward. And that's exactly what the shroud shows. No artist in the 14th century could have known that. Medical science only confirmed it centuries later. As Mel Gibson once said during his research for The Passion of the Christ, we're not looking at myth, we're looking at trauma, documented trauma, and love that didn't turn away. Because that's what the shroud ultimately reveals. Love, not weakness, not defeat, but love that bled and broke and fell into the dust, only to rise again. And maybe that's what we need to remember, that in our pain and our scars, in the days when we feel too broken to go on, he has been there. He wore it first. He carried it all. And he left behind a face so that we wouldn't forget. If this moment moved you, If you felt something stir deep within you, take a second to leave a like on this video. Not for numbers, but as a sign of reverence for what we just witnessed together. And if you want to walk with us through stories that awaken the spirit, subscribe to the channel. We're building something sacred here, and you are part of it. Because in the final chapter, you'll see how this piece of cloth, torn, scorched, and stained, survived centuries of fire, persecution, and doubt, and how one last test left scientists without answers, but believers with something more than proof. We're almost there. What kind of image survives fire? What kind of truth refuses to be silenced by centuries of skepticism, by heat, water, time, and human doubt? The Shroud of Turin is not just a relic, it is a survivor. In the year 1532, a fire broke out in the chapel where the shroud was kept. Flames consumed the reliquary. Molten silver poured onto the folded linen. The heat was enough to melt metal. Yet when the cloth was later examined, though scorched at the edges, the image remained untouched, as if it were protected, preserved, meant to remain. Centuries later, scientists would subject the cloth to more fire, boiling oil in one test, controlled heat treatments in another. The goal? To make the image disappear, to prove it was man-made. But nothing erased it, not even time. When carbon-14 testing was performed in 1988, skeptics celebrated the results, dated to the 13th or 14th century, but it didn't last. The sample tested came from a patched area woven into the fabric after the fire, which contaminated the results. Later studies confirmed what many suspected. The test was flawed, and so the mystery endured. Mel Gibson brought up something else, a name most people forget: Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy man, a secret disciple, who stepped forward to take the body of Jesus and bury it with dignity. Without him, there would be no shroud. It was Joseph who wrapped Jesus in linen. It was his tomb that cradled the body. And it was through that act of courage that we now have this witness in fabric, a silent but relentless testimony that refuses to fade. And what about the coins on the eyes? The ancient pollen? The AB plus blood? The tridimensional image burned into 2 microns of linen? The experts still can't explain it. Some don't even try anymore, because maybe it's not meant to be explained. Maybe it's meant to be believed. Mel Gibson's voice grew quiet as he ended his thoughts on the shroud. This isn't just history. It's a message, a sign that he's real, that he lived, that he died, and that he rose again. And that's what makes the shroud more than a mystery. It's a mirror reflecting our own need to believe, to be forgiven, to be loved. If this journey touched your soul, I ask you now from your heart, write in the comments, Jesus is the King, not because someone told you to, but because you felt it, because you saw it in the cloth, in the blood, in the light, and in your own story. That phrase may seem simple, but to many, it's a declaration that transforms lives. And if this video awakens something in you, there's another message waiting. Click the video that's now appearing on your screen. It holds something powerful, something that may reveal the next step in your journey. Don't miss it.